It's Friday, July 12th, 2019, and you are watching Battleground. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. I was guest hosting Battleground last week with Sheila Gunn-Reid, and I promised you Ezra would be in this chair for this week. That was fake news because Ezra was once again over in the UK doing double duty, covering the latest Tommy trial and going to the so-called Press Freedom Conference. So you have me again for another hour, but you don't have Sheila. You have another Albertan, and that would be my guest host as well, Keean Bexte. Welcome to Battleground, Keean. And you're right now, I believe, in the riding of AOC. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm in AOC's district right now. I think it's the Bronx or something like that. I don't know. I'm in a hotel lobby, so if I get interrupted, that's why.
Yeah, and by the way, if anyone isn't familiar with those initials, that does stand for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. And I have to tell you, Keean, just yesterday, no word of a lie, we put in a new air conditioning unit up at Casa Menzoid in Richmond's Hill, Ontario. And I got to say this, I can safely state that AC is way, way better than AOC. What do you think about that?
I mean, that I would agree with that. Just in general, I think most things are better than AOC. She's trying her best to destroy the United States.
Well, thank you so much for helping out here with the guest hosting and doing all that technical work. As frequent viewers will know, the computer always freezes with me. Maybe it's these big ham-hock thumbs of mine or something. I'm always pressing the wrong button. But let's get right to the heart of the matter. Of course, as I mentioned, Ezra is covering the Tommy trial. Incredibly, sadly, inexplicably, I thought, I didn't think, I hoped for, Keean, that when he was sentenced, as he was this week, I hope it was going to be for time served. But you know that the people in the UK, they want to make a scapegoat of this man. They have a burr under their saddle, and they want to make an example of him. And yet this man, who has already suffered disproportionately for crimes he did not commit, let's be clear about that, is going to go back to jail for another 66 days. What are your thoughts, Keean?
My thoughts, I'm a little bit concerned because, and Ezra said this exact same thing, what happens in the UK inevitably comes to Canada. And I have done what Tommy Robinson did. I accosted a terrorist outside of an Edmonton courthouse, doing exactly what he was charged for doing, is put him in jail for months on end, and is now taking him back to jail. It was meant to punish criminals. And whether or not you agree he's a journalist or not, I mean, he's getting treated worse than the rapist he was interviewing.
Indeed, whether he's a journalist or not, or a citizen journalist, that's besides the point. He didn't do anything worse than what other members of the mainstream media in Britain were doing. They get a pass. Tommy doesn't. This is clearly politically motivated. And Keean, I believe Mr. Producer is telling me we do have a clip of our Commander-in-Chief, Ezra Levant, weighing in. So let's see what Ezra has to say about this.
Levant for the Rebel.media. I'm standing outside the Old Bailey Central Criminal Courts in London shortly after Tommy Robinson was sentenced to prison for live streaming his political commentary on Facebook outside a rape gang trial last year in Leeds. This has been a very long procedure, 14 months back and forth in the courts. Tommy has already served 10 weeks in solitary confinement before that original conviction was quashed. This was a retrial, and yet he was convicted again and sentenced again. The long and the short of it is he was sentenced to a maximum of 9 months in prison. They reactivated an old 3-month suspended sentence, added to it a new 6-month sentence, and ordered that they be served consecutively. 9 months in prison for citizen journalism. But as I mentioned, because he served some time improperly, he gets credit for that. There's other mathematics that apply. So in the end, the effective sentence will be 19 weeks in prison. And again, because there's a rule about early release, Tommy will be out in 9.5 weeks. So after all the math, Tommy Robinson will be in prison for 66 days. He was led out of the courtroom directly. He had a bag of his clothing and personal belongings. He was led out by security through a special stairwell, and as I speak, he is surely en route to a prison somewhere right now. I spoke to him briefly when the sentencing submissions were over, but we were waiting for the judges to come back in. He gave me his thoughts. He was remarkably calm. I think he was resolved. He's been to prison before, so the idea of spending a few months in prison more is less daunting to him than it would be for someone who's not been to prison before. He's also hopeful that it'll be a less punitive prison experience than before, that he'll have certain civil rights because he's a civil prisoner, not a criminal prisoner, and that means he has certain privileges that should be accorded. Whether or not that happens, I don't know. I think there's a real risk that the prison authorities will deliberately put him in a dangerous position, either to have him killed by prison gangs, which are dominated by the Muslim prison gangs, or alternatively, that he'll have to go in this tiny box of solitary confinement for 23.5 hours a day, as he was last time. So that's how he seemed to me when I saw him in court: calm, resolved. Resigned is probably too big a word. Looking forward to getting out, I think, is more accurate. And he gave me some notes that he asked me to say to people, and I gave a short speech, very short speech, of Tommy's remarks to a small crowd that was here. The bulk of the crowd that was outside the court has marched to Parliament Hill, but there were a few folks here who were remaining for some word. Here's a short excerpt from the short speech I gave of Tommy Robinson's words that he asked me to tell people. Take a look. So this is from Tommy Robinson to his supporters, and I'll look in the camera because I think his supporters, not just you folks here who are remaining, but everywhere, will be interested. So Tommy said, "I have been sentenced to 9 months in prison. That has been reduced because of the months I have already improperly served in solitary confinement. I will serve more than 2 more months of guaranteed solitary confinement. None of this was decided by a jury because a jury would not convict me of journalism. A jury of British men and women would be outraged by the widespread rape of our girls, not by the person who is reporting on the widespread rape of our girls. And that is what I have been sent to prison for, not for inciting vigilantism and not for disrupting any trial. They weren't disrupted. I have been sent to prison for exposing a crisis in our country that the police and the judges and the media all know about, but all prefer not to talk about out of political correctness. But if the establishment thinks this will stop me, they are sorely mistaken. Unless I'm killed in prison, which may be their real goal, I will be back soon with a renewed commitment to telling the stories that the mainstream media won't tell and that the police and the courts will do nothing about. I see that in the United States, a politically corrected millionaire named Jeffrey Epstein has finally been charged with raping young girls. No one ever thought he would be charged because he's so politically powerful, but he was. That's a justice system that works. If he were in the UK, the journalists who exposed him would be the ones going to jail. That's what happens in a country without freedom of the press. Thank you for your support, and don't forget about me in prison. I promise I will be back, and I promise we won't rest until the rape of our children is stopped." So that's Tommy's message that he asked me to deliver because he had to be taken straight away and he could not come out.
Wow, Keean, miscarriage of justice, kangaroo court, none of these terms even begin to express how I feel about what happened earlier this week in the UK regarding Tommy. And let's be frank, whether you're a Tommy fan or a Tommy hater, of which we know there are some, if you had an honest conversation, what he's served in the past and what he's about to serve now is it's so disproportionate. It's akin to giving the death penalty for somebody jaywalking. And the very idea, I mean, hey, listen, you're too young to remember, Keean, but back in 1986, there was a movie called 9.5 Weeks. It was quite a sexy little drama with Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke. His 9.5 weeks is going to be fraught with danger. As Ezra and Tommy himself pointed out, there are people behind bars who hate Tommy, who would like nothing better if they could to poison him. And by the way, folks, in case you think I'm exaggerating things, this is why Tommy, on his first jail sentence in regard to this particular trial, lost, I can't remember, I'm going by memory, almost 40 pounds, because he was terrified that they would be somehow contaminating his food. This is what I'm very much worried about. And Keean, I'll tell you this much. After he serves this sentence, I wouldn't put it past these justices, the establishment in the UK, to come up with some other fantasy trumped up charge to throw him back in prison. This is a disgrace with a capital D, my friend.
It's not just everyone's ashamed of what's going on here. I speak to people. I was speaking to someone outside of Trump Tower just yesterday in New York, and lots of them are tourists, and I was trying to speak with New Yorkers. But when people were like, "Oh, I'm from the UK, mate," I was like, "Oh, well, what do you think about Tommy Robinson? He was just convicted for journalism." And they were just as disgusted. They said, "Well, I'm not a supporter of Tommy, but of course I think that it's wrong what's happening to him," which is, I think, the general sentiment of everyone, right? Anyone who's not in this elite tier of people, whether they're justices or in the police, not the rank and file of the police, of course, but the top brass or politicians, every regular British individual is upset by this. But we have our first super chat, I think this is called. This is my first time reading a super chat, so I'm excited. Triple 08 says, sent to prison for reporting on child molesters. Welcome to globalism. Yeah, welcome to globalism is right. That's exactly what this is. It's a bunch of people, generally Remainers from the UK, who are upset that people are exposing the problems that we see from rampant immigration that the EU has been foisting upon the United Kingdom. So this is Globalism 101, Tommy Robinson.
And Keean, I love this T-shirt. On one side it said "Convicted for Journalism," which is basically a new way of saying shooting the messenger. I know they used to do that in England centuries ago if the messenger had the temerity to bring bad news to the king. But guess what? That odious tradition is very much alive and well in 2019. They don't have the death penalty in England anymore, but they'll think of whatever they can to put this guy behind bars. And then on the back of his shirt, of course, he had "Britain equals North Korea." Keean, that's kind of insulting to the regime at North Korea. I know it's called the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. Oh, and by the way, every time you see the words democratic and people's in the official name of a country, you know it's a dictatorship, all right? But I mean, in North Korea, we know it's a dictatorship. They know it's a dictatorship. As they say down on the Midway, let's not kid the kidders here. But the UK pretends this is a Western nation that subscribes to freedom of the press and freedom of expression and all the other freedoms. But they're showing by their actions that if you tread into politically sensitive waters, i.e. if you're flagging some cultural inequity out there, I'm couching my words very carefully, you, the messenger, will be punished, not necessarily the rapists in that Muslim grooming gang that we talked about. I'm almost beside myself talking about this, Keean. It's sad, and as Ezra has said, he predicts we are maybe 5 to 10 years away from the UK. The UK is our little canary in the coal mine. We have so many traditions in common with the UK, given how this nation was formed. I hope Ezra is wrong, but I think he might be right, Keean.
I think you're right too, and I think we're going to have to start referring to the United Kingdom as the democratic monarchy of the United Kingdom. Just to with a little asterisk there. But speaking of the United Kingdom, Ezra actually was just there. I think it just kind of lined up together. Him and Sheila were at the Press Freedom Conference, which is just peak irony, I think, that it was happening as Tommy Robinson was being hauled away to prison.
Wow.
So he actually ended up speaking to, I I think it was a minister from the Pakistani government.
Yes.
That I think it was absolutely epic. I think if we can play that clip, I think we should.
It was fantastic. Mr. Producer, do we have that clip of Ezra in full glory going after a member of the Pakistani government? I think we do. Check this out, folks.
Shame on you, and shame on you for inviting him. Shame on you, you censorious thug.
I'm really sorry, but we're kind of running out of time. We've got another panel session. I wonder if there are any questions, very briefly, for Minister Popovsky.
No, I got Shorty.
I see there are not. There is one.
Yes.
Very quick one.
Thanks. Actually, I'm not going to be directed by you. I'm going to ask a question to the Pakistani gentleman.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am. Because it's a Media Freedom Conference, and you're not going to shut down questions about a censor. You censored me, sir. I have a Twitter account in Canada, and because I wrote something that traduced some Pakistani blasphemy law, you complained to Twitter, which took down my tweet in Canada. So can you explain why your Islamic supremacy in Pakistan is silencing my personal and journalistic freedom in Canada? And I know it happens in the United States too. And frankly, you sure should be embarrassed to invite a censor like this. But back to the thug. Who the hell are you to censor me in Canada? Answer.
Now, I don't like...
I know you don't, because you don't like free speech.
I don't like...
You don't like free speech.
Okay, would you like to answer that briefly?
I just respond to you, sir. First of all, you want your sentiments to be respected. Just look at the tone and the talent you've adopted. Is that the correct way? You have a right to ask questions.
Well, then why did you censor me?
Did I censor you?
You shut down my Twitter tweet.
I did not.
Don't lie.
How am I responsible for that?
Because the government of Pakistan did. The government of Pakistan.
I'm respectful to you.
No, you were not. You censored me.
I did not censor you.
Don't lie.
All right. Why would I lie?
Because that's what you do.
Okay. No, we don't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Shame on you and shame on you. Shame on you and shame on you for inviting him. Shame on you. You censorious thug. You censorious thug.
And what you call freedom, at times you are projecting certain sectoral agendas.
Well, you know what, Keean? The year still has 5 months to go, but so far I think Ezra has the best new term for the calendar year 2019, censorious thug. And man, talk about truth in advertising, eh?
No kidding. I never want to be on the other end of that finger when he's wagging it at that Pakistani minister. Oh my God.
Well, you know, but, and you know.
What I want to know, why was the Pakistani minister there in the first place? Like, are they, a great example of journalistic freedom in the world? I don't think so.
You know what? That is the question. And Ezra rightly said to one of I guess the moderator on the panel, shame on him as well for having this censorious thug on the panel. But you know what? It ties into this whole so-called press freedom conference, because as you adroitly pointed out before the clip, Tommy Robinson gets sentenced 66 days for doing citizen journalism while this conference is going on and everyone's patting themselves on the back. And Sheila Gunn-Reid, our beloved colleague there, had a delightful little item in terms of perverse irony about censored editorial cartoons. Now, what in the last 12 or 13 years or so would be one of the most infamous cartoons, maybe in political cartooning history? Oh yeah, that would be the Danish Mohammed cartoons, which wasn't there. Now, Keean, if you were having a segment about censored cartoons and not having the infamous Danish Mohammed cartoons that actually resulted in people losing their lives and the mainstream media turning into cowards for not reprinting those cartoons, that's kind of like making an NFL documentary about NFL football dynasties and somehow forgetting to put the New England Patriots in that documentary.
Yeah.
I mean, that was ridiculous.
Why? When I think about it and try and think about this cartoon, I don't know what they would actually put on that wall other than that cartoon, that Danish cartoon. I mean, that's the political cartoon. But speaking of censors at that conference. It wasn't just the Pakistani minister. There was also the censors, the Canadian government there. Christia Freeland was there doing her best to shut down the rebel, which I was pretty impressed. Didn't actually work out very well for her, did it?
No, and unbelievable. Because I liken myself to the umpire behind home plate, I'll call him as I see him. The likes of CBC, CTV, so on and so forth, they actually stood up for us for a change. I mean, I think that's the Christmas miracle. I never would have expected that, especially in this climate of, Trudeau cutting those payola checks for mainstream media, and of course the normal 1.5 billion of pork he sends the CBC's way, courtesy of the taxpayer. So that was astonishing. And right now, I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm trying to think of what the unspoken strategy was there. Maybe it had less to do with championing the rebel, as they rightly should, because we would stand up for other journalists. I know I would. And it has more to do with their own frustration over Freeland, acting like a Contessa at this conference. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that we should show the video because it gives it some context. It shows how everyone was immediately outraged. It wasn't something that they spoke about afterwards and were like, yeah, no, kind of weird. They were immediately outraged. So if we could get the producer to cue that up, I'm going to read the rest of these chats that I've been slow on. Proud Boys Calgary. They say Ezra is rebel honey badger. Yes, Ezra does not give a dollar sign, pound sign, exclamation mark, E exclamation mark. I agree. He doesn't give a shit. Now, Kappa Dasso with 22 Norwegian krones, I think it is. UK is a province of Islamic State of Europe, and GB. I'm not sure what GB is. Okay, and now we have MVP. I want to commend the Rebel for supporting Tommy and journalistic freedom. The Rebel's been really good at supporting Tommy, I think. Of course, I haven't been covering any of the Tommy stories at all, but we've sent Jessica out there, we've sent Ezra, we've sent Sheila, I think. Or no, maybe she was just covering the journalistic content. Yeah. But we've also done this whole thing with real reporters, right? We've sent Andrew Lawton out as well. Yep. A bunch of other, what's that Australian chap's name? I'm not sure. We've sent quite a few people out there to cover the story because we're just interested in having people talk about it and have the story actually covered from a real perspective, from a perspective of the people, not the perspective of the media elites from the United Kingdom, which of course, a story like this with international attention, when it's just left to the United Kingdom to report on, the story's going to be corrupted, and they're going to just report on how the facts that they want to report on when they're not really true. So if we could throw to, what were we throwing to before?
No.
The
100%, Keean, and I just want to say, first of all, thank you to all those people so far that have contributed some money to our super chats. As I was alluding to earlier, we're not on the Trudeau payola list. We're not the CBC, nor would we take government money if it was offered. We have to go to you, the people, to do this kind of journalism, and it's expensive, folks. I mean, we're not staying at five-star hotels. We're not flying first class. We're doing everything on the cheap. It still adds up, and I want to thank you sincerely. Whatever you can contribute, $1 or $2, it all adds up to keeping the lights on here and buying these flight tickets, hotel accommodation, taxi cabs, etc. But in the meantime, I think we do indeed have that clip you were alluding to, Keean. So, Mr. Producer, if you could run it, please.
So, Global Mail, Global, CTV, Al Jazeera, CBC, and the National can come with me, please. And the others?
What about the rest?
The rest of us?
The rest will have to see that.
No, I think we all go.
That's
nonsense. No, go.
That is
nonsense.
nonsense.
We're not going.
Let's take us to the room and we can see if we can. No, we're not going, Brittany. We're just not. We're all going. This is a media freedom conference.
Yeah, this is ridiculous.
We just don't do that.
Yeah, we're not going then.
Yes, friends, those are mainstream media journalists defending my right to ask Freeland questions. They're defending.
Well, you know what? I think I'm going to actually break my boycott of Lotto Max and buy a ticket, even though they've worsened the odds by 5 million to 1, Keean. I mean, I mean, the odds against all those cats coming to our defense, I think, would make even the most reckless gambler cringe. That is amazing. Good on them, by the way. And by the way, what an excuse. The room's not big enough. That place looks like an abandoned warehouse. You could park a 737 in there, you know. So I mean, that's a thing of joy to behold, and it must have driven Freeland, who in another life, in another time, was a journalist herself. Can you believe the perverse irony at play here, Keean?
No, I can't. But well, maybe I can. Chrystia Freeland doing this, and her staff doing this, is par for the course of the Trudeau government. I'm almost certain, and we should. I think we have a standing ATIP on this to just like find everything that they say about us. But I'm fairly certain that there's been a directive sent out by the PMO or the high levels of the Trudeau government to everyone on how to operate whenever critical media is around, be it the Rebel, the True North Initiative, or True North Center, the Post Millennial, because when they do, they turn into these recluses and act really weird, be it moving a press conference to a broom closet to make sure that nobody can get in there who's not sanctioned. I mean, every time I've gone to go see Trudeau or cover him, there's been some sort of excuse from either the Parliamentary Press Gallery or from the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C. that's kicked me out so that just me can't be there and ask the questions that I want to ask. It's pathetic.
Okay, and I can tell you, watching that clip, except for the happy ending of the journalists standing up for the Rebel reporters and others excluded, was deja vu all over for me, too. On May the 3rd, Efren, our wonderful cameraman, and I went down to World Press Freedom Day. It was having a announcement at Chorus, which is a large media player in Canada, and the keynote speaker was Maryam Monsef. And I got left off the list, but was told to hang around in case an opening occurs. Yeah, I'm going to sit there for 2.5 hours, you know, praying. Again, I may as well buy that Lotto Max ticket. And secondly, I just ran up to Maryam Monsef as she was running for her safe space, and my pertinent question was this: you're here advocating for world press freedom, and your government is instructing the United Nations at conferences such as migration, such as climate change, not to allow us, Canadian journalists, in to cover it. And Mr. Producer, being the trained broadcast professional he is, he has a clip. You'll see my questions, and you'll see Maryam Monsef's so-called answer to my questions. Check this one out. Oh, we had a little audio technical difficulty.
I can't hear it right now on my phone, but you know what? I have to say, the one thing that these ministers and the Prime Minister himself need to learn is, is it playing now? No, there's some audio problems. One thing that they need to learn is that there's nothing worse than having a rebel follow you and ask you questions while you try to ignore them, because it looks so bad on them. It's much, much more preferable, I would imagine, if I was a politician, to have, to invite them into a press conference so that everything can, operate as it normally does, instead of how they force us to operate. Because we ask these questions, the questions that we would ask in the press conference, but they're not prepared, and they look like fools. Like, look at when Ilhan Omar was responding or not responding to my questions about whether or not she married her brother, and the silence following all my questions. Did you marry your brother? Did you file false documents to the court, putting you in contempt of court? A bunch of these questions, and she just had no answer, and she looked absolutely atrocious. And that tweet was shared, it was seen millions of times, and it was tweeted and retweeted for weeks. I'm still getting notifications about it because of how awful Ilhan Omar looked, when if she would just invite us into a press conference, or rather not deny us credentials, it would look much better for her. It's the same thing goes for the Trudeau government.
Yeah, and Keean, if someone were to ask me, did you marry a relative? There's no nuance there. It's yes or no, right? And the thing, you're right. These ministers, these our own censorious thugs, as Ezra would call them, put themselves into a no-win position because when they say no, we're not part of the state-sanctioned and approved and funded media. We're not trained stenographer seals that bark, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, 3 bags full, sir. We still ask those questions. You saw Ezra with the Pakistani minister, and I think we have the clip. You'll see. Oh, sorry, we have the clip of, is it Keean, Mr. Producer? Okay. Oh, with Ms. Omar. This is a great one, folks. Shared millions of times after Keean shot it. Let's check it out.
Says, Ilhan, if I could get a moment of your time, could you tell me why you filed illegal tax returns in 2014 and 2015?
On the which committee?
Can you tell me definitively or not, is Ahmad Elsi your brother?
For the markup?
Yeah. Is he your brother?
We're in the middle of the legislative briefing.
We're going, yeah.
Is he your brother?
We're going to which one?
It's Foreign Affairs. I'll go with you. Can you tell me definitively, yes or no, is he your brother? And why can't you answer that question?
The remarks you gave me earlier.
Why did you refer to him as your child's uncle on Instagram? And why did you lie on court documents saying that you hadn't seen him since 2011, when in fact you'd been talking to him all the time on Instagram?
Sir, we're not doing ambush interviews.
This isn't an ambush.
You can send me an email.
Why are you so afraid to answer these questions?
Thank you. So we have budget and
how can anyone take you credibly on the student loan tax file when you were cheating on your taxes in 2014? And how can you call for Donald Trump's tax filings when nobody can trust you on the file at all? And why are you scared to answer the questions?
Excuse me.
What are you hiding?
Trying to find my phone at the moment.
So that you can go on Instagram and talk to your brother?
Oh, you cheeky monkey, Keean. So you can go talk to your...
watch this thing.
Well, is a brother or lover? We don't really know right now. And, I have to tell you, I think the takeaway moment of that video is early on when she does this SWAT, like she's trying to get rid of a mosquito, or it's like the royal wave. And but I got to tell you, that was amazing footage, Keean. But tell me this, especially in the United States of America, where they have the First Amendment, something I wish we had here, and I'm sure Tommy and so many others wish there was such a thing in Britain. I'm curious why this kind of an interview, in your face, asking these direct questions of Omar, hadn't been done earlier as opposed to when you did it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question because I would have figured that, a United States Congresswoman would be pretty much followed by the press 24/7.
Yeah.
And at least during the workday. But that's not the case. She was just got off the podium to condemn the quote unquote Muslim ban that Donald Trump implemented last year, which for the record was not a Muslim ban whatsoever. And she gets off the stage saying these outrageous things. And the media was, of course, all there filming her say these things. And then she leaves and they don't bother to ask her any questions or follow up at all. It's stunning to me. I mean, the media in Canada is more on the ball than it seems the media in the US is. But that's why Donald Trump, I think, gets so much political reward for bashing CNN, because I think it's just so transparent how bad they really are. But there are some super chats that I want to grab here just before we keep going. Trimple 08, $5 Canadian. He says, fight for freedom while you have it, because doing so after you've lost it is usually fatal. Go Team Rebel. That is absolutely true, I think. And then one more, $5 from El Batlas. He says that I've not had the chance to thank you yet, so thank you, Keean. Truly excellent team of real journalists. Wow, that means a lot. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to do the work that we do, but it's definitely a result of all of the people that we have in the background who make us all able to do the work that we do. I mean, the producer in the back room at Rebel HQ right now is doing great work, and all of our editors putting our videos together and actually tracking down these politicians for us to interview and ask questions that CNN and CBC don't want to ask them. They put in a lot of effort there too, so a lot of thanks goes to them. But back to what you're saying, David.
Yeah, and I think, to put a big bow on this, to draw all these stories together, whether it's the Pakistani minister that Ezra went after for being a censorious thug, whether it's Omar that you went after and what her agenda is, whether it's what we see in Canada, M103, the so-called anti-blasphemy against Islam Act that is not yet law, but, give them a few more years, whether it's the reintroduction of Section 13, the anti-free speech, pro-censorship part of the Canadian Human Rights Act that the government is trying to resurrect like a vampire from the crypt. I think what we're seeing is, in all these examples, what I would call an element of soft jihad, Keean. And this is actually, I think, more dangerous and more fearful than living in a world of hard jihad. Look, blowing up bridges and flying planes into towers, that's amateur hour, right? It just results in destruction. Of course, there's a tragic loss of life. But isn't it better with those of a different agenda? Those who would say want Sharia law in the West, to not blow things up like a bunch of amateurs, but to become part of the establishment, whether it's in politics, education, journalism, law enforcement, and you craft the new laws, new legislation from within, and before you know it, slowly, Keean, the line moves ever so slightly, and then when you wake up to the fact that these freedoms that we cherish are gone, it's too late. And I'm not trying to sound like an alarmist. We see it happening. I just wish a lot more people would get engaged to see this ongoing attack on their rights and freedoms.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. It's something that disappears slowly. And it happens incrementally, yep. And every day you lose a court case, you lose on a piece of legislation, and they keep ticking the dial to the left, and then you wake up and you realize that there's no turning back. So, yeah. It's something to keep an eye out.
Well, then again, Keean, maybe in the U.S., maybe Joe Biden is the Clark Kent who will be elected and don his Superman costume. I mean, you brought up an interesting item from yesterday, I believe. Was that speech from yesterday? Where?
Yeah, he gave a foreign policy announcement in New York yesterday, and sort of the basis of it was. It's hard to say what the basis of it was because he was sort of rambling every which way. He didn't really have a coherent thesis, but he opened his speech by saying, we need foreign policy that is also domestic policy. And he wants to sort of integrate, I don't really understand what that means. He wants to integrate immigration in with everyday domestic policy. And you know as probably better than I do what that means, because I certainly couldn't get a grip of what that meant. And the people who were watching it didn't really understand. After the fact, I was interviewing them saying, what was the takeaway from the speech? What did you learn? And they were just like, they all had sort of a different idea of what he meant by that. And some were just like, yeah, we sort of wanted more specific than that. So,
you know what? Great point in terms of the messenger eclipsing the message. It reminds me of the Vaughan, Ontario MP, Sabara, when he stood up, I think it was last year, and he kept talking, it was some anecdote about fishermen, and he corrected himself, I think 3 times, to call them fisher folk, because we live in Justin Trudeau's people kind universe. And I was joking with Sheila about this because it was so, crazy that he was using a term that nobody in the world uses. I know female fishermen, and they don't use the term fisher folk. It's a completely made-up word. Mr. Producer actually has this clip. Just you wait and see, folks, of how a messenger can eclipse the message.
Recently on a family vacation to Boston, I had a conversation with someone who would love, their fishermen would, fisher folks would love to have access to Europe like our Canadian fisher folks do, excuse me. I grew up in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, and there's canneries and so forth, and I clean fish to pay for our university. And we have increased access for those fisher folks and those loggers.
Did you hear that? Sorbara?
So I guess we need, using that logic, we should have fire folks and policer folks, but, just incredible. So that was Sabara in all his glory. I'm going to see if Mr. Producer has the clip of Mr. Biden, because as far as I can tell, Keean, I know Biden's old, but he's not that old, and it's either a medical condition, which I wouldn't make fun of, or he was inebriated, which might have been the case. Anyways, folks, you be the judge. Here's Biden in action.
We believe in free speech. That's why I'll end the gag rule, the global gag rule that prevents money from getting to NGOs. We have to be honest about, excuse me, our trade policy has started home by strengthening our greatest asset, the middle class. For when it does well, everyone does well. He has, I don't know how to say it, he's alienated us. We need to work again with Canada and Mexico as neighbors, not as adversaries, like 5G, artificial intelligence. What am I doing?
Now he was rushed out with that.
Yeah, what are you doing? Keean, before you weigh in, I was having a deja vu moment back to the 70s. You're too young to remember this individual, but he lives on forever in YouTube. And it was a comedian called Foster Brooks. And he pretended to be a drunk guy. I think we have a clip of him. If Mr. Producer gives me the thumbs up, it's Foster Brooks at the Dean Martin Celebrity Roast. A thing that would never be on network TV today, let me tell you, with the subjects they handled. Roll that clip, please, Mr. Producer.
As the Puerto Rican gentleman just told you, I have never met Don Rickles. In fact, he's probably wondering what I'm doing here.
So, Foster Brooks, Joe Biden, Keean, I can't tell the difference. Can you tell the difference?
No, not at all. And you said you wouldn't make fun of it if it was a medical condition. And I mean, you're right. Don't make fun of medical conditions. But also, this isn't just someone on the street. This is someone running to be commander-in-chief, someone who's deciding whether or not we should, I shouldn't say whether or not the United States should bomb Iran after they shoot down a drone. There can be no miscommunication when you're speaking with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You got to be able to communicate as president. You got to be able to communicate with the people if you're president, and most of all, you got to be able to communicate with your supporters if you want to get elected. And if you can't do that, I think he's going to be the first major candidate we see lose a significant vote share or support share. Because right now he's leading, but I think he's the most likely to be losing the support that he currently has, especially when you see people trending upwards like Kamala Harris. So I think that tough times are ahead for Joe Biden if he can't get some rest and start enunciating his words.
Oh, I think you're right. I mean, first of all, let me say it speaks volumes that Joe Biden is probably the most credible candidate the Democrats have right now, given the lunatics on the roster also vying for that job. But you're right, Keean. I think he has put himself into a position where if he is the nominee, and who knows what's going to happen a year from now, he's always going to be playing defense. So much stuff is resurfacing about this guy now that he potentially could be the leader of the Democratic Party and by extension, God forbid, the president of the United States. So much stuff is surfacing. And like I said, he's not going to be able to get clear messages across. He's going to continually be playing defense. And that's not a winning strategy in politics, my friend.
So who do you think, David, I'll put you on the spot here. Who's your favorite Democratic nominee and why is it?
Do you know what? You know who I'd love to see? I would love to see Elizabeth Warren win the nomination. Not because I think she has the right stuff. It's just, I would just adore. I mean, it would almost be like a WWE pay-per-view to watch Donald Trump go after Pocahontas one-on-one on a national stage. I would pay big bucks to watch a debate like that because this is a woman who is a fraud. This is a woman who is a pretend Indian. This is a woman who speaks out against capitalism and the big corporations, but who gamed the system to get an affirmative action grant for her tuition expenses when she was at university. The very idea that this, and I can't understand why so much media lets her skate, but I would love to see her win this. And you know what? Who knows, Keean? A year from now, when the convention takes place, that's an eternity. That's like 10 eternities in politics when things can happen in a day or two. She might be the one. And like I said, when the debate is on with President Trump, pass me the buttered popcorn and a soft drink. I don't want to miss a single second of that.
I'm kind of sad that so last election cycle when Trump was elected, I was in university, so I had all this time to sit down in a pub and watch all of these election debates take place. But now that I'm a reporter, I'm going to have to be there covering it instead of avoiding the disaster that will be before in 2020.
Well, let me put you on the spot. Likewise, Keean, who do you think, given the pool of candidates, might win, and who would you like to see win, whether it's for good reasons or nefarious ones?
Mm-hmm. So I don't know who's going to win. I have absolutely zero idea of the dynamics between the voters and whose voters will go to who when Biden inevitably collapses. But who I'd like to win? Well, I'd probably say Tulsi. I think that having a candidate and one of the only candidates in the Democratic nomination who is against forever wars, I think is one thing that stands out to me. And I think that's the one thing that the Democratic Party and of course the Republican Party after the days of Trump come to an end. One thing they're going to have to realize is that millennials and Generation Z in particular, which I like to say I'm a part of, but I think I'm maybe 1 year off of it. We don't like the idea of going to war over frivolous things, especially when we can't see any benefit from it or any imminent danger from not taking part in that war. We grew up during the Iraq War. We grew up during the Bush administration, and we grew up seeing all this skyrocketing debt that the United States is in and Canada is in too, frankly, even though much less of our budget is spent on defense. We grew up seeing how wars destroy countries, both the countries that the wars are in and the countries that the wars are controlled out of. And they're tired. People my age are tired of those wars. And having Tulsi being the only Democratic candidate, or maybe there's others that have sort of joined her. That's what makes me like her. Whether or not she's going to win is a totally different question. The swamp is endless.
But Keean, when you speak about going to war, I assume you're framing that narrative in the context of Iran and what they're doing. I would say I agree with you. I think, and I think if we polled the American public, regardless of political stripes, there is no appetite for another war, especially in the Middle East. However, when you have a regime doing these essentially acts of war in terms of going after tanker traffic in international waters. I'm not advocating a war. I'm not advocating boots on the ground, but a missile strike from a drone, absolutely, because we have found that sometimes the cost of doing nothing, and yeah, I'm thinking about the Jimmy Carter regime, 1976 to 1980, the cost of doing nothing can be far more steep than doing something. So I agree with you. I'm not big on a war, especially in that region where sometimes, you know, well, I actually wouldn't apply to Iran because I know the Iranian people, if they could reverse the time-space continuum and go back to 1979, that revolution would never have happened. I mean, my heart goes out to those in the Persian community. There's so many in my neighborhood where I live. They're wonderful people. They fled the madness of that area. It's not it's not Iranians that are at fault. It's our government. But even if there has to be collateral damage of some, I mean, that's the way wars work, or at least missile strikes work. You can't be a doormat to these dictators and mullahs that have absolutely zero respect for our rights and freedoms. And lo and behold, look at that story that broke this week. Iran is indeed in violation of the nuclear enrichment agreement. How many times do we allow this regime to step over the line, Keean, before you swap back? And like I said, not necessarily going to war, but giving them a shot across the bow at least.
A tactical strike. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I think the mantra of the Tulsi campaign and younger folks and generally the American people now is don't go antagonizing, but also don't take any shit from people. Yeah. Because, especially from Iran, because you're absolutely right. How many times does this happen until, how many times do we let them cross this red line that Obama set back in whenever it was, and the answer is, well, maybe they do need a tactical strike. But you're right. One thing I want to talk about is the what are these called? Super chats. 008 has been very generous today. $5. He's talking about Kamala Harris. He's chiming in there, and I think everyone else. It'd be great if everyone else did that as well. Let us know who your favorite Democratic candidate is, who the most likely candidate would be to beat Trump, or who the most fun candidate would be for Trump to annihilate on the debate stage. But Primple says Democrat candidate will be Kamala Harris. The only thing the Democrats have left is identity politics, and she wins the pretend victim race every time. And yeah, I think you're right. Unless like there's like a lesbian, like a Nigerian lesbian join the race
in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, honestly, I think you alluded to it earlier, Keean. Biden is polling the highest. I think, as much as I would love to see the street theater of Pocahontas versus Trump in a debate, televised debate, I think Biden so far is probably the most credible, if you can believe it, in terms of the Looney Tune candidates that are the opposition. And like I said, that speaks volumes. I mean, heck, if Hillary Clinton were to come back, she seems almost like the voice of reason compared to some of the others running in this. And again, the good news is for people who like the president and support him, I am absolutely pretty much certain that he is going to win 2020. I can't see him losing, despite the narrative, despite the media is ganging up. Russian collusion won't go away, even though that's fake news. They're still playing games about, look at this failed rally when it's standing room only. There's no passion like that on the Democratic side. There's no champion for the Democrats. I think, Keean, from this stage in the calendar, 2019, that Trump is going to get a second mandate. What do you say?
I would agree with that, and I'm just muting myself because I see in the chat, and of course I do everything that the viewers want. I'm muting my audio because apparently there's echo in the background. there's one super chat here. It says, "Hi, David," and I want to hear what you think about this, David. What's your best argument against UBI, which I imagine is universal basic income? He says he's not rooting for it, but he's just asking, as a millennial, do you support it, and why?
That's universal basic income, did you say? It faded out there for a second. Yeah, no, I think this is the slippery slope down to basically universal everything: free education, free Medicare, and then free housing, free cars. The fact of the matter is, we have a society in the West where we have a safety net in terms of social welfare. If you lose your job, you get unemployment insurance, or employment insurance as it's called now. If you're really destitute, there's welfare. There are no people, or there should be no people, barring medical conditions, starving on the streets. And the idea that we can give free stuff, nothing's free. Keean, we know that. Bernie Sanders points to the free Medicare medical system that we have in Canada. What percentage of our tax dollars, which, by the way, is going up every year because of the aging population, is paying for this so-called free medicine in Canada? So, no, I'm not a fan of that. And I think we have a generation, Keean, the way I see things, when I was younger, I sound like the old uncle at the table now that's going to be told, oh, shut up, that was back in the Jurassic Age. But, there used to be a time you'd see a guy, maybe he was on a boat, maybe he was driving a Cadillac Eldorado, and you used to say, you know what, I'm going to put my nose to the grindstone, I'm going to work really, really hard, I want that. And now it's, how come he has that? Why don't we raise the taxes on that individual? Why don't I get that for not doing the work? This is the kind of mentality I see, being boosted, even in academia. I mean, our good friend Rob Shimshaw always has incredible stories of campus unmasked, and basically, it seems that in the hierarchy of higher education, Keean, it's all about campaigning for free stuff. I mean, it's been so infected by socialist Marxist theory that this is actually the mindset of younger people today, and I'm not about that.
Well, I agree with you to a degree there, David, and I would take the similar adjacent approach in that I would support UBI if the government went scorched earth on pretty much every other welfare funding, so not defense or anything like that, but healthcare or education. If there was a universal basic income where people could be real capitalists with their government allotted money and send it to their kids' school or send it to their local hospital or their roads, then I'd be happy with it. But barring that, it seems like just an excuse to spend more money.
Well, Mr. Producer just whispered in my ear, Keean, time has flown. I mean, I've had such fun with you, and I want to thank, by the way, everybody that contributed any amount of money. We were going to talk about Unplanned, the movie premiering today, that's causing all kinds of controversy because, that's what abortion does. And I just want to tip my hat to Cineplex here in Canada for indeed screening this and not backing down from the mob. And as you can see on the screen, there's Cineplex putting out an ad regarding their decision to screen Unplanned. You know what I find perversely ironic, Keean, is that Cineplex found the need to put that open letter. I mean, I'm a big fan of the horror genre, but horror movies of recent years, I'm thinking of Hostel, Saw, that kind of thing, those have become what I call torture porn. It's really not about suspense. It's all about graphic violence, seeing people literally torn apart. It's not entertaining. It's gross. That's okay. We'll screen that. We won't put out a letter saying, please have some tolerance for our torture porn. But a movie that touches upon abortion, ooh, this is serious. 10 seconds, your final thoughts, Keean.
Yeah, my final thoughts are I'm definitely going to go see that movie, and I might do a video review of it for folks who haven't gone to see it. If it's a good movie, I will recommend that they do see it. It could be a terrible movie. But my guess is that it's a great movie, and that's why the Liberals are so triggered over it, because they know that it will do its job and convince people that maybe abortion isn't this great thing that the left seems to think that it is. So I'm going to watch it, and maybe I'll do a video on it.
Fantastic. And I'll just end by this, Keean. Talk about the law of unintended consequences, because the progressives have been screaming about it so much. They have given this movie probably $100 million of free publicity, the kind of publicity the Avengers movies get when they're released. So thank you so much, guys. Now you've created a total awareness of this movie. And look, you don't like it, it's not your cup of tea, move on. No one's forcing you to buy a ticket. But if you want to see it, you should go into a theater and not be harassed and bullied to get out of that theater. So we'll see how this movie does at the box office, Keean. And I want to thank you for co-hosting with me. And folks, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that next week, our Commander-in-Chief, Ezra Levant, will be back here. I'm sure he has a ton of things to say about his UK trip. In the meantime, have an awesome weekend and good day.
Thanks.